analyst for the Alaska Policy Forum. She is their educational analyst and specialist. It is Sarah Montalbano. We bring her on board this morning to discuss all this and more, including her recent presentation in front of both House Ways and Means and Education on what's happening in the state of Alaskan schools. And we welcome her to the program this morning. Hello, how are you?
Good morning. I'm doing well. How about yourself?
You know, no complaints. It's Monday, but I mean, no complaints. It's all good. So Sarah, I know that I got some rave reviews. I know that I got some slides that you use and everything else. So you can share your screen today if you need to or want to in any of the talks or discussions or what's going on. But you sat down in front of House Ways and Means and House Education, and you laid some things out today. So can you first give us some background and tell us what you were tasked with bringing as a topic? And then can you give us, a recap of what happened in light of what's going on in Alaska education? And again, I saw, I don't know if you want to bring in, I saw the report that Must Read reported about yesterday about the teachers outnumbering the staff. You and I have talked about that a couple times. I don't know if that's some old news or new news or what, but give us some background here on what you brought before the legislature and, kind of give us our own little private recap here on this.
Yeah, this is a huge topic, and we were tasked with a large topic. We were asked to talk about outcomes, what those have looked like historically for Alaska. We were asked to discuss the funding formula in particular, as well as the general state of spending, because we all know that the state's allocation for funding is not the end of the story, far from it. And we were also asked to talk about school choice and both its academic benefits as well as the fiscal effects on states, which are generally positive.
Well, and I think that's, that is a big task. I could see this being a monumental task of trying
It
to
was
go
a
over
large
all this.
presentation.
So how did you guys break this down? Give us kind of the rundown of how you went through it, and again, give us our own private show here.
Yeah, we began with discussing Alaska's outcomes, and the good thing is that we've seen some ranking improvements on the 2022 National Assessment of Educational Progress. We haven't changed scores. We haven't improved our actual scores on most of these subjects, but we have increased our state rankings slightly. Um, we looked a lot in this presentation at the examples of Florida and Mississippi because they did particularly well promoting early literacy, as well as, these states are pretty big on school choice, especially Florida. These states have implemented some interesting incentives for other outcomes like AP classes. So we discussed that with the legislature too.
Okay, so you're teasing me with all the stuff that we're talking about
Lot.
here. So break it down. All right. So, and this was in front of both committees. I mean, were you tasked with this? Did you give the same presentation for both committees, or were they broken out into two different topics or presentations?
It was a joint committee hearing, so this was in front of the whole group, both of them at the same time.
At once.
Yeah,
Okay.
at
All right.
once. Um,
Well, walk us through it. I mean, we got,
Absolutely.
we
We've
got
got time.
48 minutes. Let's break it down. Start off with, let's start at the beginning and go from there.
Absolutely. So as I said, we have these better trends, especially for uh, children who are in the free and reduced lunch program. There's a lot of issues with this metric, but it's generally a good sense of students that are facing some sort of economic disadvantage. And so, on the 2022 NAEP, free and reduced lunch fourth grade math scores increased from 50th nationwide to 48th. Those are good things. These are, ranking improvements. It could be just that other states declined a lot over the pandemic. But the fact that we were able to stay pretty steady is a good thing. And then we discussed, these states that have made early literacy improvements, but also long-term improvements in their 8th grade math and, reading scores, as well as AP courses. So one of the interesting things about Florida is that they offer an incentive for teachers and students to score a 3 or higher on the AP exam. So that's a passing score. And, the fact is, in 2020, Florida had 34% of their high school graduates passed with one AP test with a 3 or higher, at least. And that metric is only 14% in Anchorage. So we can look, the overarching message of the presentation is that we can look at these incentives and figure out better ways to do things. And we have the examples of other states to look at.
And as we look at this, I mean, the problem is that we seem to continue to have this attitude of, well, we're Alaska, we don't do it like anybody else. We need to do our own thing. The problem is other people have already broken the trail and they've made the path easier. We just need to be able to look at it and follow those steps, right? And we have been up until this point just not interested in doing that, not interested in making some of those changes. And that's why we've remained 48th, 49th in all these educational scores.
Absolutely. We're unique, but we are not so unique that we cannot learn and take the best pieces from states that have done these things well. Florida is a leader for so many states nationwide. I mean, they're doing some really incredible things to ensure that their kids are getting the education they need. So that was a large part of the presentation, is saying, look, Florida has done it. I don't see why Alaska can't.
And of course, the reaction was probably a lot of eye rolling and everything else. What specifically should we be modeling? Florida, Mississippi. What are some of the things, in your opinion, that we should be taking up with that? I mean, what are some of the things that you think right off the top of the pile we could adopt? We could adopt easily and see a change.
One of the interesting things Florida does is this incentive program for AP classes and things like that. Their early literacy reforms, the Alaska Reads Act passed last year, is actually a pretty good mimic of these programs, and we'll see some improvements in fourth grade reading proficiency from that. Another state that does their school funding formula pretty well, and I can give a recap of the formula if we'd like. I don't know.
Absolutely. Yeah, we could do that.
Absolutely. So the way our funding formula works right now, I'm going to toggle to the slide because this is a particularly complicated subject. So the base student allocation is this $5,960 that every student is supposed to get. And then we have average daily membership. That's our enrollment average. That's counted through 20 days in October of each year. And then average daily membership is adjusted for all sorts of things like school size and district cost, special needs multipliers, career and technical education, intensive needs, and then correspondence students are multiplied by 90% and then added in back at the end. And so the basic formula is that you multiply the BSA by this adjusted average daily membership and you get basic need. And basic need is paid first in part by local contributions for those districts that are in an organized borough or municipality, and federal impact aid. And then the rest is paid by the state. So that's the general scope of the funding formula. One thing that a state does that I find very interesting is Tennessee. And what Tennessee has done, they just revamped their school funding formula. And their districts are actually receiving an outcomes-based component. And so they get their BSA, they get their weights, they get some very interesting things. But then they will get per student bonuses based on things like third grade English language arts scores, fourth grade growth in ELA scores, eighth grade math scores. For high school students, they're looking at ACT scores and improvements from those tests. And high schoolers that are graduating with industry credentials that matter to employers. And so that's one of the things I think we could do better, is incentivizing the outcomes we want to see in the formula, because we need to reward the schools that are getting results and incentivize the behaviors we want to see.
Well, and I agree with that. I mean, I think that is, performance metrics are important, right? I mean, we have to look at these things and understand If we're producing a product, we need to have a good product at the end. Any company or factory that creates something, if they create a substandard product, they can't come back and go, well, we need more money. We're doing the best we can do, and that's what we do. But we need to be paid more. We need more for this or more for that, without some kind of metrics. And there was a whole discussion on the BSA that went through. There are some crazy things that have changed in or that are, I guess, misunderstood in the BSA. One of the talking points, and I was just looking for the story real quick because I can't find it, but they talk about one of the things in the BSA is they count, they count some schools, like for example the Anchorage School District. They count the school district even though it only has 40,000 students. It counts the school district like there's 77,000 students in there.
Yeah.
And you're just like, wait a second, we're still not performing at, we're well below the national average. We're still super low on all these things. And yet there's no metric to hold them accountable for the product that they're delivering. And at the same time, they're getting almost twice the money that you would logically think. I mean, the formula is very complex, right? I mean, talk about that for just a second. How the fact that some of these places get, they get almost double the amount of money for the number of students that they actually have.
Yeah, this is a huge part of the funding formula, because if you assume that the space student allocation of 5,960, that's what a student's getting, you are missing out on all of these adjustment factors that are adjust the average daily membership. So you've got your enrollment count, and then you apply a school size multiplier. The school size multiplier, I think, is too complicated for what it needs to be. There's a whole tier system, and I've written it down on my slides because this is so hard to just hold in your head. But schools under 20 students get a multiplier of 39.6 per student. So multiply that BSA by 39.6. And then, schools with 750 students or more are being actually penalized. So once you surpass about 250 students, you start receiving less as a district for the actual number of students that are enrolled. So that's one component of this that I think incentivizes keeping schools under that 250 student mark, because you want to maximize the funding you get for these students. And the median school size in Alaska is actually 177 students, which is well below that, and you get 8% more for your BSA. So that's complicated, and I think that definitely has some incentives there. And then the next thing is the district cost factor. That's normalized to Anchorage's cost of living, and then all these districts have different cost multipliers for their cost of living. And then one of the big ones is the special education multiplier. That is applied at a flat 0.2, so you get 20% more than your average daily membership for this general special needs. And then there are intensive special needs students. So if a particular student is identified with intensive special needs, they get a multiplier of 13 to their BSA. And that doesn't necessarily have to go directly to that student. Pardon me. It's fungible. It goes into the district's pot, and the district decides how they're going to spend it. It's a funding formula. It's not a spending formula.
Right.
But that is certainly a contributor. And then there is there's a very small multiplier for career and technical education. That's 1.5%, I think, upward. And then correspondence students are actually given kind of the short end of the stick in this formula, because their membership, their enrollment, is subtracted out at the front of the formula and then multiplied by 0.9. And then they are just added in at the end. So, the funding for correspondence students is 90% of what traditional public school students get.
Right. Well, this is again. This. I mean, we could have a full hour simply on the intricacies,
Yeah.
and the ins and outs of the BSA alone.
Pretty
Just the
good summary. Yeah,
yeah,
right here. But
exactly of what goes on there. Sarah Montalbano is our guest. We're up against the break. We're going to continue here in just a moment. Don't go anywhere. The Michael Duke Show continues. It is your home for common sense, liberty based, free thinking radio. We'll return with more here in just a moment. Sarah Montalbano is our guest. Back with more right after this.
I am so sorry. I think I'm coming down with something in the coffee.
Listened to by more staffers in Juneau than any other show because their bosses told them to. And after what they just heard come in, they're going to be best. You're a bad, bad man. The Michael Duke Show.
Okay, now we're in the break. Sarah's coming down with something.
Sorry
Honey
about
and
that.
honey and lemon. That's all I could say. Honey and lemon.
Yes.
It works. It works wonders. It works wonders. Sarah, this is a lot to choke down. I mean,
It is.
it really is.
I
And
learned so much putting this together. I really did.
I really wish that I could find I wish maybe I saved it. I don't have it right here in front of me. But the story that did take a little bit of a crack at breaking that down and taking a look at it, the number of students, the amount of funding. Rob Myers in the chat room says the school size multiplier gives districts more money for smaller, less efficient schools and penalizes districts for closing buildings they don't need. And that may be the case, but then again, when I look at Anchorage and they've got 43 or 44,000 students and they're getting 77,000 students worth of money, I mean, that doesn't necessarily look like they're penalizing them too much at that point, and especially analyzing when homeschooling, gets only 90% of the pot as far as that goes as well. It's really frustrating to watch this whole thing because the average person, I mean, up until 18 months ago, I didn't understand to me, the base student allocation was you give this much per student at the attendance rate, right? That's what I thought. I
Mhm.
didn't realize that it had all these different multipliers and factors and levers and everything else. And all of a sudden you realize, my God, it is so complex. And when the average person reads the newspaper and says, well, yes, we should help our kids. It's only $1,000 more per kid. But you realize that districts are getting 2, 3, 4, 5 times the number of students they actually have in the classroom. That's when it really turns into some real money, right?
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. And then I think it's important to remember too that the funding formula isn't all the funding we get. I have a slide in this presentation where I list off so many of the other things that contribute to the form on top of the formula. You've got your one-time grants, you've got federal grants, and one of the biggest ones in history was this COVID relief money that districts are still working their way through. And just we can talk more about that, but it's just these adjustment factors and all of this stuff on top of the formula means this is not a simple problem.
No, it's not. It's not a simple problem at all. It's a very complex problem. And in some ways, I'm sorry, I don't mean to be cynical, but in some ways, I believe that's by design. It kind of obfuscates everything. And so you can't really tell how much has been spent where, et cetera, et cetera. It becomes a real, it becomes a real problem in the long run.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's so important to keep the focus on this once the furor dies down. Because I think so many people are coming into this the first time saying, yeah, increase this. This is money that's directly helping the kids. It's only $1,000 and that $1,000 follows the student. That's not how it's working. And I think that's unfortunate.
Yeah, no, and that's the thing. They think, oh, it's only $1,000
Yeah.
per student, but again, it's not. If it's $1,000 per student for 44,000 students, or it's $1,000 for students for 77,000 students,
Mhm.
that becomes the big sticking point in the long run. And where do we go from here? How do we fix that? That's the thing. I mean, do we simplify the formula? Do we open it up and start talking about it? Because I guarantee you, at this rate, nobody on the other side who is pro increase the funding wants to open that formula up at all, because they're kind of happy with just the way it is right now.
Mm-hmm. There are definitely opportunities to simplify the formula that I can get into because our presentation discussed just some recommendations regardless of feasibility, political viability,
Right.
things like that. Just like looking at this and saying, hey, here are the technical issues that other states have worked to simplify from formulas that looked a lot more like Alaska's that they've changed up.
All right, we are up to the return here. We're returning here in just a second. The Michael Duke Show. Common sense, liberty-based, free-thinking radio. Like it, share, like it, share, like it, follow. Here we go.
The Michael Duke Show. Not your daddy. Wait, sorry. Not your daddy.
Yep. The Michael Duke Show continues. Our guest is Sarah Montalbano from the Alaska Policy Forum. We're going to jump in with her and continue our conversations. I was just saying during the break, that I don't think that the funding formula, the way it is right now, being uber complex and overcomplicated, I don't think that that's a bug. I think that's a feature, right? I think in some ways it's working as intended, because it makes it so complicated that people don't really understand what is happening inside that BSA. So when they read the newspaper and it says it's only $1,000 increase per student, they go, well, that's, cost of living and things in 10 years and yada, yada. Okay, I can see that. Not realizing, again, I don't mean to beat up on Anchorage, but that's the one number that I couldn't find the article here during the break, that where they said there was 44,000 students, but they were being paid as if there were 77,000 students. I mean, $1,000 a student. Now you're talking real money when you're talking about going over and above that. It's millions of dollars. And so my question was to Sarah, do we simplify the BSA? Do we make it a simple one-to-one? Do we make it simpler and better instead of having all these different carve outs and everything else? What do you say to that? Do you have, are there some solutions to what we can do for the BSA to try and simplify this and make it easier for people to understand and for it to fund the state's educational system?
Absolutely. First and foremost, the school funding formula should be transparent enough that families and the general public can easily understand it. We came up with some recommendations for the legislature, and I will hit some of the highlights here. One of them is that bond debt reimbursement tends to incentivize, having excess facilities space compared with deed standards, things like that. And so if you're able to restrict bond debt reimbursement or allow it for rapidly growing districts that need this extra space, that's a great idea. But we want right-sized facilities and to reduce some of this bureaucratic influence, because I can talk about that as well. The hold harmless provision is an interesting thing, and I had to do some digging back into the history of Alaska's school funding formula. And the hold harmless provision is basically that districts won't be penalized for a drop over a certain percentage in their average daily membership after the adjustment for school size. And so in 2001 or so, the hold harmless provision had 10%. So schools that dropped 10% or more, their funding was staggered over a couple of years in that decline.
To deal with it, right.
Exactly. And the hold harmless was reinstated in 2008, and that has a more generous enrollment threshold now. It's 5%. So, schools and districts should be incentivized to keep their students through good or improving outcomes. I think it's definitely important to have that incentive there. And then, as I mentioned, I think one of the biggest things that would make a difference is incentivizing outcomes in the formula. And I talked about Tennessee in our previous segment. They talk about scores and growth with per student bonuses for schools on these things. One of the things Florida does is their AP class bonuses. So they've got
Right.
a direct to teacher bonus, but the districts also get, an increase to their average daily membership base funding as well. And that seems to be helping them. They, had the second highest rate of AP exam passing, and they're still among the lowest per student. All right, I think that's the first bracket of things.
Right.
We can talk more in depth about correspondence students and some of the other weights, the intensive needs weighting, school size multiplier, average daily membership, things like that.
Well, and I think, again, that's where we need to move on here to now. So the second part of your presentation, after going through the BSA and everything else, taking a look at all these different factors, what was your analysis of the outcomes of, because this was about outcomes, right, in the long run. So what was your analysis of the outcomes based on what we have done thus far? And then we'll save the last segment for changes that should be made overall to fix the overall outcomes in the long run. So give me the current outcomes and what it looks like here in the state.
Yeah, so Alaska is spending $18,313 per student as of 2020. That includes all sources of funding. That average varies wildly between districts. I think the Aleutian Region School District is the highest of the 2018-2019 school year, and they're spending $104,000 per student. And then there's districts like Galena City that their enrollment is mostly correspondence students, and so they're spending about $7,000 per student. And Anchorage is about $16,500 for all sources of funding. So that's the basic scope of things. And then when we look at our outcomes, we have not improved our outcomes. And one of the graphs I showed, and your radio listeners will probably miss out on this, but I would like to show it here if I'm able to.
While Sarah's bringing that up, I remembered now where the story was, and I'll bring it up. It was from the Alaska landmine. He actually did, credit where credit's due. He actually did a fantastic article on discussion of the BSA to begin with. So we'll get back to that. Go ahead, Sarah.
All right. Let's see if this will go. I've got my chart pulled up here.
Okay.
Yeah, here we go.
There you go.
And so a lot of the discussion seems to be centering around this increase for inflation. And I thought it would be important to look at this baseline from 2002 instead of looking once these school funding formula changes were made. And so, looking at that 2002 baseline, we've got about $12,000-ish in funding per student in average daily attendance. So this is actually data from the National Education Association. The research division does a really good job of tracking these things. And I just adjusted upward each year for the Urban Alaska CPI. And so what I want to call attention to is that these formula changes in the 2008-2009 area led to a huge jump in per student funding, almost $5,000. And that was, stuff like increasing the intensive needs weighting, hold harmless, things like that jumped up this per pupil spending. And then, in 2021, we're still 22% higher than what we would have been for inflation, adjusted upward from 2002. The most interesting part is this line that's moving across the chart, and that's fourth grade NAEP scores in reading. And that's declined 8 points. That's almost a full year of attainment since 2003 when we started working into the NAEP assessment. So our outcomes have declined over this time. We have infused schools and districts with large amounts of money before, and that has not improved outcomes. And so that's one of the basic messages of the presentation is, look, we've done this before.
Right. We've been there, done that. We've thrown more money at it. We've seen it go down as we go through. So the outcomes are not necessarily what, what we want them to be, obviously. And this is, you also had another chart I know that was kind of like a shotgun chart that showed that it wasn't necessarily listed to a certain socioeconomic background or region or anything
Mhm.
else. It was kind of a little bit of everywhere. Some places were doing better than others, but it didn't necessarily have to do with the amount of money that was being poured into those districts.
Absolutely. There are some districts that have, the characteristics that are making them do well. And one of the slides that legislators really wanted to ask me a lot of questions about um, shows this plot of schools and their per student funding, and then their scores on the AK star are on the left, the vertical axis. And all of the schools that are clustered in this low cost, above average outcomes are correspondence schools or charter schools. And so that was definitely one of the takeaways I wanted to see is like, look, this school choice that we do have, these charter schools and correspondence schools, really seem to be improving students' outcomes, and they're managing to do it in a very fiscally responsible way.
Which is what we, of course, as homeschoolers have argued for many years that that the most efficient use of the school dollars was in the homeschooling correspondence type environment. Because again, we didn't have the brick and mortar overhead. You had one teacher that dealt with a lot more students, but on a one-to-one basis versus in a classroom and everything else. And it was, overall, it is a great example of what can be done with less, how less can actually be more in the long run. Unfortunately, they don't want to hear that. This is why there's the argument that we've seen, and you've talked about, again, Florida and Mississippi. I know that Arizona's now got their education fund and things like that.
Mhm.
I mean, this is why something like backpack funding could be so important for this kind of situation, right?
Absolutely. Florida, I don't know if you've heard, we're very excited. They've passed their universal school choice, this education savings accounts kind of idea where the funding can follow the student. And a lot of these funding, I think Arizona awards for their ESAs range between about $4,000 and $9,000, depending on the characteristics, the grade of the child. Do they have special needs? Those can go higher for that, and they're reaping fiscal benefits too, just on a per student basis. Like we're looking at, I had a slide here, and that's 90% of their base funding for students, and so the state's getting to keep 10%, and just from letting the parents make these choices about what works best for their child and how to customize the education. And one study I pulled up for this is that done by EdChoice, and they estimate there's per student savings between $3,300 and $7,500 generated through fiscal year 2018 for state and local taxpayers, and that equates to up to $28 billion. So this is not something to sneeze at. This is good, obviously, academically for a lot of students, but it's also very good for state budgets as well.
Sarah Montalbano is our guest. We're coming up on the break. We got more coming up. Don't go anywhere. We will continue in just a moment. We will come back and maybe she can offer us some of the solutions that she sees. And we will have that discussion in just a moment. The Michael Duke Show. Common sense, liberty-based, free-thinking radio. Back with more after this.
Running on 100% pure beard power. Oh, also some coffee. We dip our beard in coffee. Nice beard. The Michael Duke Show.
Okay, in the break with Sarah Montalbano. Give her a chance to drink some tea, honey, water, whatever it is.
Yeah.
A vodka. We recommend vodka on Mondays. It's
Monday morning might be a little too
come
soon for
on.
me.
It's 5 p.m. somewhere. Little bit of brandy. Little bit of brandy will get you going on through there. Yeah, that shotgun chart, which I have a copy of, and I don't know what I should have brought it up, but the shotgun chart really, I think, shows in a snapshot, it really shows everything at once, that you could see that it doesn't have to be a high dollar, high budget, the best school out there. It is, it is more along the lines of focusing on the student rather than on the building, the infrastructure, the administration, and everything else. That's, I think, really been part of the problem here in the growth of this.
Yeah, one of the data points I brought up because I think it is important, even though it is not an Alaska specific problem, is this administration growth that we've discussed before. And I looked at district administrator growth, and they grew almost 18% since 2008, 2008 to 2019. And the number of teachers declined almost 6% over that period. And so I think it's just, this growing compliance cost is not helpful for schools and districts actually achieving their mission of having kids, give them the basic skills they need.
Well, I guess you got to ask, is that really the mission?
Yeah, exactly. If that is the
really?
mission.
I mean,
Hopefully it is.
I mean, you would hope that would be the mission, but it seems like more and more, the more we look at it, the more things, it would seem that the mission is more justification and expansion. That seems to be the mission in a lot of ways. That's the very nature of government. Doesn't make it evil or anything else. It's just the nature of government that seems to be the expansion, justification, and expansion seems to be the overall factor in government, and schools are no different in that case.
It's the curse of bureaucracy that we see. Well, if I don't spend my budget, then I'm going to have a cut next year, so I've got to spend it all.
Got to justify what I'm doing, so I need to spend
that
the
is
money.
not a school-specific conclusion. That is every agency.
I got my first education in that when I was about 22 years old, 21, 22 years old. Went to the DOT, and I was running a parts warehouse at the time for automotive and truck parts. And I remember the guy brought me into the back room and he said, "Get out your pad. I need 3 of these and 10 of these and 5 of these." And it was I got some orders from him every week, but this is the first time it was like a $20,000 order. And I realized it was because it was the end of the fiscal. It was June, early June. And he wants to fill the shelf with stuff. And so he had to spend it to put it up there. And it was just like, wow, it was just so shocking to see. Anyway, we're going to come back here in a second. One of the things that I want to talk about is the revocation of the requirement in the BSA that used to be a requirement, a statutory requirement, that 70% of the BSA had to go to the classroom. And that's changed. And that has led to, I think, what we're talking about here, again, the bloat on overhead and in administrators versus teachers. You've been talking about that a lot, where you've got, 3 teachers or 3 administrators in some school districts for every teacher. It's led to that. It really has. And that administrative bloat is sucking up a lot of the dollars that we're talking about.
Yeah, I can't speak to the exact calculation, but I know there's been discussion where it's, less than 50%, and that's kind of atrocious. Yeah, I'd be happy to talk about that.
Right. Anything else that we're about 90 seconds away here. Anything else that was a big surprise to you as you dug through this and came out and put all these things together? Anything else that was a big surprise to you before we go back?
Just looking at the way these multipliers blow up the average daily membership, honestly, just walking through those calculations myself was a pretty informative exercise. And then, the difficulty of finding information prior to, this 2008 school funding formula changes. I was like, what did our school funding formula look like before? And that's kind of hard information to find. So Yeah, I just pulled so many numbers for this that my brain is just scrambled.
It's interesting stuff. At the end of these adjustment factors, the number of students used for the BSA formula can vary greatly from actual numbers of students being educated. For instance, in Anchorage, the 40,944 average daily student counts as if there are 73,372 students after the adjustments. The
Mhm.
Alaska Gateway School District, meanwhile, has a post-adjustment ADM of more than 4 times the 325 average students that it recorded last year. That's insane. All right. Hold the line. Sarah Montalbano. The Michael Duke Show continues. Common sense, liberty-based, free thinking radio. Here we go. Sarah Montalbano is our guest from the Alaska Policy Forum. She's the education policy analyst for the APF. And we're talking about her presentation in front of the Joint Committee of Ways and Means in Education on the BSA and everything else. One of the problems that we were just talking about is that the BSA, there used to be a regulation in that 70% of the BSA needed to end up in the classroom. And that was gone away here in the last 10 years or so. And that has led directly, I think, to an overhead and bloat in the administrative side. You have put out some columns and analyze some reports that talk about, we've got some places where there are almost three administrators for every teacher. It's usually it's 1-to-1 or 1.2 to 1. A lot of places there are more administrators than there are teachers, and that's problematic in the long run. And I think has led to this bloat that we've talked about in education. But let's get down to it, Sarah. What is the solutions? What does your analysis lead you to, and what did you recommend for solutions for the legislature to try and address these problems we have in our education system? I actually have to unmute Sarah. First of all, let me do that. There you go, Sarah. Sorry about that.
There
Go
we
ahead.
go. My apologies. I should have looked. This gets a little complicated in these next recommendations, but some of them I think are useful to look at. As I was mentioning, the school size multiplier I think is too complicated, and it is not exactly obvious to me why there needs to be all of these different adjustments for these different factors. And we've discussed this with some experts from other states, and they're going, okay, this is kind of weird. So, we could look at, creating a simple whole number weight for schools below a certain size and eliminating it for higher tiers. And solutions like that would help to correct this incentive that we have to have smaller schools that are less efficient when they don't need to be. And then average daily membership, I think we could be really leveraging as an incentive here. Alaska has the highest rate of chronic absenteeism in the United States. That's 29% of students are chronically absent, which I think is, gone for 3 weeks or more. I would have to look at Deed's definition. And the fact of the matter is that it is hard to improve outcomes when students aren't in the seats, that they're not there learning the material.
They don't show up, right?
Yeah, and that's one of the things that our average daily membership calculation right now, we use an enrollment count period, which is actually pretty unique. We count over that 20 days in October. Most states are using average daily enrollment through all or most of the school year. And so that gives them a better sense, a better representation of what they expect to spend. And then 7 states actually use a variant of average daily attendance. So they're counting the students present in the school over most or all of the school year.
Right.
And I'm loath to say it, but California does this very well. And they have a 12% chronic absenteeism rate. And so that's something we should be thinking about as well in these discussions of the formulas. How do we get students in school to learn this material? Yeah, and then finally, discussing correspondence students. This will segue us into our school choice discussion.
Right,
But
right.
correspondence students are 16.5% of K-12 students in Alaska, but they are only 5% of K-12 expenditures. And so one of the ways we should be looking at this is how can we make this fairer for correspondence students? There's hundreds of correspondence students with special needs or participating in career and technical education. And so why shouldn't they be eligible for these multipliers, that 20% up and that 1.5% up, to fund them at a more equal level? And then there's students with intensive special needs that aren't getting anything different in their correspondence school funding or their allotment that actually makes it to the families. Um, Parents could do a lot if they got a 10 times multiplier or a 13 times multiplier, like students in public schools too. So that's just one thing to consider, is how do we make this fairer? How do we also serve our correspondence students as well as we are funding the students with these characteristics in traditional public schools? The only difference is where their education is taking place.
Well, I mean, I'm not going to, setting aside the special needs and special education component of it, but what you're saying, that this public or the correspondence schools should get, more of the take, yada, yada. See, I would disagree with that. I think we need to go backwards from the other side and say, you need to look at what the correspondence schools are doing with this 90%.
Yeah.
And if we could take
They're
all
doing
of the
remarkable
schools,
stuff.
yeah, if they could take all of the schools and do it with a 90%, well, we've just shaved 10, you just shaved 10% right off the top, let alone all the multipliers and everything else that are on top of it. That is,
Absolutely.
that's part of the problem here. And that's why educational choice is so important. And quite honestly, I think that's why it's cropping up all over the US. You're seeing this become a rallying cry. I talked about it earlier with Virginia, when Terry McAuliffe got up and basically told people, you don't get to have a say in what we're teaching your children. And I think that was a red flag for many parents across the country when they realized maybe they need to be taking a little bit of a closer hand. And of course, the pandemic, showed that brick and mortars are not the only answer, whether it's correspondence, homeschooling, whether it's distance learning, whether it's, teacher pools or learning pods or, all these different kinds of things. They are all viable options. At the time, they were the only option because brick and mortar schools weren't there. But now people are saying, let me take that money. Let me do with it what I think is best. And I'll, and as you showed in a lot of your presentation, we will deliver a better product in the long run.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I really want to bring attention back because I'm being accused in the comments of bogging down in the formula. You are right. The goal of all of this discussion is getting each individual child the skills that they need and the education that works best for them. And I really firmly believe that school choice does this very, very well. It's funny you mentioned the pandemic because correspondence school enrollment almost doubled from, I think, 2020 to 2021, 92% growth there. And our level of correspondence students are still 42% over the level they were pre-pandemic. So, a lot of families tried it, some went back, but a lot of them are sticking to it because they like the way that this works for them. And so I understand the cost savings, and it's a very important part of the program. But there is also, the fact that some parents would want to do this more if there was slightly more that reaches them through their allotment. And part of the presentation was actually delivered by my partner, but he mentioned that he went through a couple scenarios. Okay, what if we restricted correspondence schools? If all of the correspondence school allotment program children went back to public school, brick and mortar school, excuse me, that would result in an additional $162 million in funding formula costs. If we were back to pandemic levels of correspondence enrollment, we would have funding formula savings of $87 million. So, looking at this, school choice is a good bet fiscally for states on a per student basis. And I have no doubt that it helps academically, socially, economically, all of these benefits that students accrue through having an education customized for them.
Right, exactly. What's the choice? We got less than about a minute here. What's the choice? I mean, is it a savings account like it is in Arizona? Is it a backpack funding situation where the money follows the student? I mean, did you guys offer any of that quickly here?
We didn't offer ideas for new programs. We said, look, here's the states that are doing ESAs. They're benefiting from this so much. But yeah, the correspondence school program, any way that allows the money to follow the student, I think is a good thing for reaping academic and fiscal benefits.
Sarah Montalbano has been our guest today. Sarah, what else are you working on quickly here before we let you go? What else are you working on next that we need to know about?
Oh gosh, I mean, we've got so many projects in the pipeline, and you should go to alaskapolicyforum.org and just click subscribe to our newsletter, and you will see our posts as I get them out there.
Yeah, and Sarah's got some great stuff. It's a good education on education. If you go to the Alaska Policy Forum and click on the education links and just work your way back through the articles that Sarah's been working on, a lot of the analysis, some of that stuff is super eye-opening, and it'll give you a whole new perspective on things. Sarah Montalbano, thank you for joining us on this Montalbano Monday. We appreciate that.
Thank you for having me.
Folks, we're out of time. We got more coming up tomorrow. Brad Keithley, Chris Story will be joining us. The Michael Duke Show. Common sense, liberty-based, free-thinking radio. Be kind, love one another, live well. All right. Final bite at the apple for Miss Education, Sarah Montalbano. Sarah, final thoughts here as we let you go. I mean, you've great presentation in front of the legislature. You gave us, I thought, a pretty good recap here. It's hard when we're breaking it up like this, but it's
scattered.
Yeah, it's a little, and you're not feeling good and everything. But I'll give you final thoughts here. Maybe just summate and what's your suggestion here? Give me your final thoughts.
The broad strokes of this presentation are that we have very high per pupil spending, accounting for everything. The school funding formula isn't the end all be all of education funding. Our outcomes have declined even as we've increased our spending. And we have so many examples from other states that are doing this well and that we can learn from. And incentives matter. I cannot overstate that. That is the basic premise of economics, is that we have these incentives baked into the system, and we are going to see more of what we incentivize. I don't think that's a controversial statement at all. So those are my basic thoughts, summary-wise, for this presentation.
Well, we appreciate all you do. We appreciate your hard work, and we look forward to talking to you again soon. I'll be keeping my mouse button over the AFP website, APF website, so we can follow it and see what you got going on. Thank you for keeping us in the loop. We appreciate all you do. Feel better. Okay.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm just
lots of
on
fluid.
Horse over the hour here, so I apologize.
Go take a nap. Feel better. We will see you. We'll see you later. All right.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Sarah. Good to talk with you. All right, folks, that brings us over to the end of the show. The end of the show. That's how it works. We appreciate you guys coming in and joining us. Don't forget to check us out at the Common Sense Corps over there. If you want to help support the show, we'd love you to be part of it. Other than that, we are out of time. We will see you tomorrow. The Michael Duke Show. Common sense, liberty-based, free-thinking radio.